Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. When my wife and I were looking to buy our first home, we knew we wanted something with a big backyard. As a couple that loved to garden and entertain, having outdoor space was a must. After months of searching, we finally found our dream home on a quiet cul-de-sac. It had 4 bedrooms, 2 baths, and best of all, a huge backyard with mature trees, flower beds, and a patio perfect for hosting family barbecues. We were thrilled to finally have a place to call our own. Shortly after moving in, we met our neighbors, the Smith family. Right away, something seemed off about them. Karen Smith in particular had an air of entitlement about her. At first, it was just little comments here and there as we made polite conversation across the fence. She'd mention how lucky we were to have such a nice big yard while gesturing to her own postage stamp of grass. I brushed it off as her just making conversation. One Saturday afternoon, my wife and I were planning annuals when we heard yelling coming from the other side of the fence. I peered over to see Karen scolding her 2 kids as they played roughly in her backyard. "Enough! Get out of my yard if you're going to act like animals!" she shouted. The kids, who looked about 8 and 10 years old, immediately stopped their game and looked ashamed. I felt sorry for them, getting berated for just being kids. As their crestfallen faces scanned the ground, the older boy's eyes suddenly brightened as he spotted my vibrant flower beds. "Mom, can we go play in their yard instead?" he asked excitedly, tapping his mother's arm. She glanced over at my property and I saw a look of consideration flash across her face. "Of course not, that's rude. We can't just go barging into other people's yards," she admonished, but her tone sounded hollow, like she was simply paying lip service to being polite. I had a bad feeling in my gut about the whole interaction, but tried not to read too much into it. After all, it was just a kid making an innocent request, even if the mom's response seemed ingenuine. Still, I made a mental note to keep an eye out. Over the next few weeks, the requests to use our yard continued. Every time the kids were reprimanded or just bored, they'd beg Karen to go to our backyard. She continued with the same rote chastising, but I started to notice her gazes lingering on our property. One day I was reading on the patio when a soccer ball suddenly flew over the fence and landed near my feet. I tossed it back over, expecting to hear a quick, "Thanks," in response. Instead, young voices pleaded, "Can we come get it? Can we play over there? Please?" I waited to see how Karen would react and felt my jaw tighten when she answered. "Oh, all right, I suppose a quick game won't hurt," she replied in an exaggeratedly reluctant tone. The kids cheered and I heard the gate clang open as they spilled into my yard. I was about to say something when Karen cut me off. "Don't worry, they'll just be a minute to grab their ball," she called out breezily. I bit my tongue. I didn't want to be the bad guy and spoil the kids' fun over one short game. But the intrusion irked me. Over the next couple of weeks, it kept happening. The kids' uninvited visits grew longer and more frequent. Karen would act exasperated with them at first, before reluctantly giving in. I tried dropping hints that while the kids seemed nice, unexpected guests made me uncomfortable. Karen shrugged it off, saying they were just being kids and she was sure we didn't mind. It all came to a head one afternoon when I arrived home from work early. As I pulled into the driveway, I spotted 2 figures darting around my backyard. The boys froze as I got out of my car and stared at me like deer in headlights. "Hi guys, you should probably run home now. I don't appreciate you being here without permission," I said as gently but firmly as I could. They didn't have to be told twice, scampering away through the gate. I saw it hanging half open and went to close it. But before I could, an angry voice stopped me short. "Just what do you think you're doing?" I turned to see Karen standing on her porch, glaring daggers at me. Taken aback, I explained I was simply closing the gate after asking the boys to return home. "How dare you?" she seethed, marching over. "My boys have done nothing wrong, and you have no right to order them around." I tried to remain calm as I explained again that while I was sure they were good kids, I was not comfortable with them using my yard whenever they pleased. Karen was having none of it. "You're being completely unreasonable," she spat. "You have this huge yard just sitting here going to waste while these poor boys can barely play in my tiny space." I started to reply that regardless of my yard's size, she and the kids still needed my permission to be there. But she barreled on with her tirade. "I've tried to be understanding, but you're just being selfish now." My boys love your backyard and you need to learn to share. Her voice was rising, face flushed with anger because apparently I dared tell her kids they couldn't have something. I was quickly losing my cool in the face of her ridiculous entitlement. Through gritted teeth, I made clear neither she nor her kids had any right to walk into my yard whenever they wanted just because it was bigger. Karen's eyes narrowed at my refusal to give in. Well, if you won't be reasonable on your own, I'll just have to make you, she declared ominously, before whirling around back to her house. If I had known what she meant by that, I would have confronted her right then and there, but I foolishly believed she was just letting off steam with an idle threat. Boy, was I wrong. The following week, I got legal documents in the mail stating I was being sued by Karen Smith on behalf of her children. She was claiming my backyard was an attractive nuisance, and letting the boys play there unsupervised left me liable for any injuries. Luckily, my lawyer got the frivolous case thrown out quickly, but Karen didn't stop there. Over the next few months, she kept trying to harass and intimidate me into letting her boys use my yard. She even tried calling CPS and animal control, accusing me of abusing my dogs when I wouldn't comply. The final straw came on an early Saturday morning when someone began pounding on my front door. I opened it blearily to see a furious Karen with a manila envelope thrust toward me. "What's your problem now?" I sighed, resigned to her latest antics. "My problem is that you're wasting a valuable community resource," she exclaimed. I stared blankly. "This oversized lot should be used for the good of the neighborhood, not hoarded by some antisocial curmudgeon," she went on. Now I was just confused and growing more irritated by the second. "What are you going on about, and why are you doing it on my front porch at 7 a.m.? I asked testily. Karen shoved the envelope at me. "Because I'm solving this problem once and for all. I'm generously offering to take this burdensome property off your hands." I tore open the envelope and froze. Inside was a contract stating she would buy my house and land for nearly half its appraised value. "My boys deserve a big yard, and I've wasted enough time bargaining with you. Sign the contract or we'll be going back to court," she threatened. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This lunatic wanted me to just hand over my home for a fraction of its worth? Fury boiled up inside me, and without thinking, I tore her little contract to pieces. "Listen up, because I'm only saying this once," I said in a low, steady tone. "If you ever so much as look at my property again, I will slap you with a restraining order." Karen opened her mouth furiously, but I cut her off. "My home isn't community property, nor is it for sale, especially not to an unhinged harpy like you. If you try any more of these stunts, you'll sorely regret it. Stay the hell away from me and my home." With that, I stepped back in and slammed the door in her stunned face. I was done playing nice with this psycho. After consulting my lawyer, I sent Karen official cease and desist papers. She persisted with her crazy demands for about a week until she realized I wasn't messing around. The continuously threatened legal action finally seemed to do the trick. It's been quiet for over 2 blissful months now. I even installed security cameras just in case. Looking back, I'm appalled I let the situation go on so long. The moment Karen failed to respect my property rights, I should have cracked down. But I learned my lesson. Sometimes you have to stand up to crazy entitlement head on. If anyone's kids try using my yard again without permission, I'll be contacting their parents immediately. I'm just glad I refused to cave into Karen's insane demands, no matter what harassment she inflicted. Rewarding her entitled behavior by selling at half price would have been insane. She had no legitimate claim to my private property just because her kids took a liking to it. This whole ordeal has definitely taught me to nip entitlement in the bud right away. You give people like Karen an inch, they take a mile. I may have been a bit too nice for my own good, but sometimes it takes meeting someone seriously deranged to learn when to put your foot down. Karen was clearly an unstable, delusional bully used to steamrolling over others. But she finally met her match in me once I got fed up enough to fight back. I just wish I'd been wiser about handling her sooner, instead of letting things get so drawn out and insane. Thankfully, it never has to happen again now that she knows she's beat and I won't tolerate her nonsense. In the end, this whole debacle brought my wife and I closer together, too. We felt violated as a team when Karen kept intruding in our space. Presenting that united front finally put Karen in her place, and we learned to communicate better about establishing boundaries right away whenever someone seems like a potential Karen. I'm thankful this nightmare is over, though it came at far too high a cost in stress and money. At least we can enjoy our yard again in peace, knowing that Karen won't be commandeering it anymore for her entitled kids. This house is our sanctuary, not a community playground. If you don't like your own space, fix it up instead of trying to seize what's not yours. A lesson I wish Karen had learned a long time ago, but at least now I know I will stand firm against such crazy demands in the future. Our house is our haven, not a bargaining chip for entitled neighbors. Never again. The next one is a pro-revenge story. This happened around 20 years ago. Our family owned 2 apartment buildings, each with 3 units. We lived in 2 of them and rented out the other 4. There were nothing but these 3 flats lining both sides of the road for about a mile. Not all had parking. On the side streets were houses and very little street parking. We had more land than most of these units because it was also our home. So we had parking for around 16 cars. Everything was fine for literally decades. Then cars started appearing in our parking lot that were not our tenants. I blocked one in one day. I went outside to see this a-hole had driven through our bushes and across the yard to get out. I called the cops, but there was nothing they could do. So I called a tow company and had them put up signs. We would have to call them to have a car towed, and the signs seemed to work. No more random cars. Until New Year's Eve one year. I arrived home, and every space was filled. There were even cars on the street blocking in the other cars. I was beyond pissed. I called the tow company, but they couldn't do anything for a few hours because they were so busy. We were in the Chicago suburbs, and it was below zero out. I had an idea. I dug out the lawn sprinklers and hoses. I ran one hose inside to the laundry room faucet and turned on the hot water. This way the hose and sprinklers wouldn't ice up, but the cars and ground sure did. 3 sprinklers moved every half hour or so for almost 5 hours. Every car, every square inch of the parking lot, the street by the cars was encased in ice. I made it a point to spray ice into the locks, between the window seals and glass, and in the grills. I put away the sprinklers and hoses, then went to bed. At 4 a.m. there was furious pounding on the doors, doorbells ringing non-stop. We just smiled and called the cops, waited until they arrived, and went outside. The cops were holding back laughter. These people were told to park here by their friend, who owned an apartment several buildings away, the same idiot who drove over our bushes. I pointed to the tow sign and told the people to move their cars or get towed. In our town, cops can ticket on private property with the owner's permission, so all cars were ticketed. They were also towed since nobody could get in their vehicle. I wish we had it on video. The next one is a petty revenge story. My husband and I got our first house 15 years ago. We're in a rural area, just houses randomly sprouting up along a small country highway. Next door was an old retiree with nothing better to do but be a pain in everyone's neck. House 2 miles down the road with too many junk cars. He'd complained to the county government. Did that new barn have proper permits? Report them. Was someone too loud? Call the cops. It's a rural country road, not an homeowners association. He pissed off so many people they'd throw out garbage on his yard as they drove by. People would snip his internet in the dead of night, etc. Apparently this old SOB was such a Karen, he was actually chased out of 2 homeowners associations prior. A real peach. Let's call him Bob. Didn't like us moving in next to him. He had a nice big new house and ours was much more modest. He wanted to buy our property to expand his land but was too cheap to fork up the money. Well, the housing market being what it was, we got our house dirt cheap and stole it right out from under his nose. Bob really didn't like us. The house was a fixer-upper, and Bob regularly liked to phone the permit office to make sure we had all our permits. If he deemed us too loud, there's a hunting lease behind us. Guess what noisy things were going bang-bang during deer season? He'd call the police. My husband and Phil have dealt with his kind for years, so they knew exactly how to mess with Bob. Working outside, they'd say stuff very loudly like, "I can't wait to put up this second story on the house. And this pool will be so nice." The permit office would call us and the cops would show up. "No, officer, I have no idea what you're talking about." After enough of these calls, they finally stopped responding. Then we could do stuff to really mess with Bob. We got a pig. He really didn't like her. Neither did I, but it was worth it. We got a rooster. He really didn't like that. We left our Christmas decorations up until March. Ooh, lordy, raise that man's blood pressure. We put up a fence. It was initially open across 3 lots, and made his yard look like a bowling alley. I guess he finally had enough. One day, 18-wheelers were loading everything up, and he was gone. I was dancing at the fence line and waving bye-bye when they pulled out. Miserable old coot. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I moved into my university dorm last Saturday. The wireless internet in my university's dorms is terrible, but for the most part it doesn't matter because each dorm has an Ethernet port for wired internet, which is incredibly fast. However, while setting up my Xbox, I quickly discovered that the Ethernet port in my room didn't work. At first, I thought it was an issue with my Ethernet switch, a device that allows you to connect multiple devices to Ethernet with only one wall port. But after some help from my dad, we realized it was the wall port that didn't work. Out of curiosity, we asked the students in the room next to mine if theirs worked. Nope, theirs was broken too. We checked the port in the floor lounge to see if it was an issue with my cables. But nope, that one worked fine. My roommate emailed maintenance to see if they could help, but they replied that it seemed to be a widespread issue, as they had received many reports from multiple buildings about the same problem. Since classes didn't start for a few more days, my roommate and I decided to hang out in the floor lounge during the day, where the Ethernet worked, making it possible to play online games. After 2 days of lugging our entire setups down the hall in the morning and back in the evening, we only have laptops, but between power cables and Ethernet cables for both of us, it was a bit of a hassle. I had a dumb idea. I have a really, really long Ethernet cable, probably around 50 feet long. Would it reach from the lounge to our room? Turns out the answer was yes. It reached with plenty of room to spare, so we set everything up, and we had Ethernet from the lounge in our room. All someone walking by would see was a cable coming out from under the lounge door and disappearing under our door. Our fun lasted about a day. We came up with the idea at midnight, and late the next afternoon, the RA knocked on our door and said we needed to put the cable away because it was a tripping hazard. Begrudgingly, we complied. Later that evening, my roommate had an idea. The issue wasn't the cable itself. The issue was that running it across the floor created a tripping hazard, so I ran to the store and bought some duct tape. My initial thought was to tape it down so someone wouldn't catch their toe on it, but he had a better idea. We had plenty of extra cable, why not tape it to the ceiling? And that's exactly what we did, giggling the entire time. Several people on our floor have commented on it, and my friend called it genius. 2 days later, and we still haven't heard from the RAs again, so problem solved, I guess. We got rid of their tripping hazard while keeping our internet. No fallout yet, but I'll update if something changes. The next one is an entitled people story. I work in a high-level hospital as an ICU nurse, and my managers are fantastic with staffing. Meaning if you have a crashing, heavy workload patient, they'll assign you an easier one so you can focus on the sick one. For background, ICU nurses typically have 2 patients and specialize in critical thinking, while the telefloor is the normal part of the hospital with less sick patients who don't need as much attention. These nurses typically have 6 patients and specialize in tasks and prioritization. So, at the beginning of my shift after the report, I show my face and greet my less sick patient who is doing fantastic, just waiting for transport to take her to her telebed. I inform her that I'll be back around 9 p.m. in 2 hours, unless she needs my assistance. This allows me time to stabilize the sick patient next door. Unfortunately, the sick patient in room 1 starts coding and the team is actively performing CPR. There's a crash cart in the hallway, 3 doctors present, the whole team working hard to save this young man. My team is handling medications, intubation, and maintaining compressions while I'm discussing potential causes with the doctors. I'm halfway outside the room of the healthier patient in room 2. She spots me through the window, presses the call light, and I initially ignore it, given the urgency of the situation. However, her boyfriend opens the door and stands in the doorway, arms crossed. To be considerate of her concerns, I ask, "Is everything all right?" He responds with a non-committal HM and attempts to guide me inside. I only give him my attention when the doctors enter room 1 to consult privately on their next steps. I glance back through the window of room 1 and decide to briefly check in. She says, "Can you get my Uber Eats order? It just said it arrived downstairs." I felt a surge of frustration, but I kindly respond, "I'm sorry, but I'm currently occupied with another critical patient. Could you?" I look towards her boyfriend, who is comfortably reclined with his feet up, watching Netflix on his phone. "Go get it for her?" He responds, "I'd rather not." "Really? You don't want to help? You witness the chaos next door through the window. saw me discussing matters seriously with 3 doctors, and observed the commotion outside your room as we struggled to save a life. So I tell him firmly, I can't. The entire team is actively working to save someone's life, and none of us can leave. You can either retrieve it yourself, or I can arrange for someone to bring you some saltines. He sighs, reluctantly gets up, and mumbles, Fine, I guess I'll go get it then, as I turn to head back into room 1. He has to maneuver his way through the crowded group of people and remains irritated, even having to take the elevator down. When they are moved to another room around 10 p.m., he loudly speaks on the phone to someone, complaining that the nurses are rude and won't even get food for their patients, among other grievances. The most shocking part? She had just come off an insulin drip for being in a diabetic coma. I have never encountered a more entitled person who prioritized their own convenience over someone else's life. The next one is an entitled parent story. I was traveling on my city's metro. It wasn't that crowded at the time, but all the seats were occupied. Still, you could stand freely without being bumped by a stranger. There was this kid sitting in the reserved seats, the ones for people with disabilities, pregnant women, and old people. Definitely not for moms of 2-year-olds. He was probably 14 or 15, I don't know. He is the hero of the story here. Then, at one stop, our entitled mother comes in. She has this cute little child who is trying to keep up with his mom's pace. Entitled mother instantly sees our hero sitting in the reserved seat and just stares at him. I guess this was her way of trying to make people automatically give up their seats or something. The kid didn't move, though. This probably irked entitled mother a lot, I guess, because she moved toward the kid with heavy steps. She comes near him, stops, and again does the stare. The kid doesn't budge. Then she starts screaming. If she didn't have the whole compartment's attention earlier, she had it now. She starts berating the kid for sitting in a reserved seat and not giving it up for someone more deserving, like a mother like herself with a young kid. I don't know what her logic was. The seats aren't reserved for them anyway. She just keeps shouting and screaming and tries to get others' opinions on it. And for a while, people were on her side. Then the kid, out of nowhere, rolls up the right side of his jeans, detaches the artificial leg, and places it in front of entitled mother. The look on her face was priceless. It looked like she was mortified and embarrassed at the same time. She just backed away silently and got off at the next stop. I don't think that was her stop. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already.